Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to whoever and wherever you are joining us to discuss the threat of waste to energy incineration in Victoria. My name is Jane Bremmer. I'm from Toxics Free Australia. A little bit about our organisation. We've been advocates for environmental health and justice in Australia for 30 years. You might have known us previously as the National Toxics Network, which retired a couple of years ago. We work on a whole range of issues. And to give you an indication of how serious the issue of waste to energy incineration is, we include it in our campaigns because it is a prime source of persistent organic pollutants to the environment, and it's part of our key work. So understanding the wicked issue of waste management. And we really need to understand when we're talking about waste what we're actually dealing with, which is our entire materials production systems. And when we look at our waste management system, that's what we're seeing reflected back to us. Everything that is in our materials production system that has a design failure that drives the waste and the packaging from our materials production systems into the residual waste stream, where we know that that's headed for disposal either in landfill or waste incineration. So when we understand the complex, interconnected nature of this huge global problem that is waste, we can really clearly see that the most important actions and decisions and reform we need are in the design phase, so that waste doesn't end up in our residual waste stream. Really good example of that is plastic toothpaste tubes. There's a lot of PR about them being recyclable. They're not. And as you can see, they end up in Southeast Asia, causing a lot of environmental harm and human health impacts. Tyres are another major problem. Massive design failure. They're not recyclable, and they're set to poison the circular economy. Plastic, very much so, is by design essentially not recyclable. So we have all these problem wastes, electronic wastes being another source, that are driving into our residual waste stream, which is where the problems lie, because that's the problematic waste stream. It's what we can't compost, recycle, reuse, full of toxic substances, which are carried through the incineration process. So what's driving the push for waste incineration into Australia? You might recall the recent federal government's waste export ban. It was Scott Morrison who announced that Australia would no longer export its waste, particularly its plastic waste. It was a very good and noble decision to make and announcement for the Australian government. However, the government at the time knew full well that we didn't have a waste management system with the necessary infrastructure to be able to manage the waste that we were suddenly not going to export. So when we look to our national waste policies, we can see that all roads effectively lead to incineration outcomes. And there's some excerpts from these reports here you can read, and hidden in the drive for incineration are suggestions of plastic recycling, advanced recycling, pyrolysis and gasification of plastic. They are all incinerator technologies as well. So we can see how incineration has really landed in Australia following this world first waste export ban, in a country that didn't have the waste management infrastructure to deal with the waste that would come from that policy redirection. And as I said, our national waste policy agenda, and it's reflected throughout our states now, the main outcome for much of our waste, particularly plastic waste, are 3 incineration outcomes, either directly in waste to energy incinerators or through the production of refuse derived fuel, which basically takes our residual waste and processes it into a pellet or a flake or a flock or something that is classified as a fuel, and then it's used to be burnt either in incinerators, cement kilns or any other combustion industry. Chemical recycling, as I mentioned, is another incineration outcome, and this is particularly of concern to Victoria because under a COAG meeting, Victoria was allocated the chemical recycling state, that is plastic pyrolysis and gasification. Sadly, the promise of this technology, pyrolysis and gasification, which we should remember was a technology that was designed by and for the coal industry, has really failed to live up to its promise. When we look around the world, these pyrolysis and gasification plants that are supposed to convert our plastic waste into new plastics are not happening. In effect, what is happening is they take this plastic waste, transform it into a syngas or a fuel, and then burn it. This is a two-stage incinerator where they create a fuel and a gas and then burn that. If they were actually taking that gas and that fuel and processing it into new plastic products, then that would be more of a closed loop system. But that requires extensive further petrochemical refinery. So this is a very expensive way to deal with plastic waste, and it's been a big failure globally. And so that's why we see that these are the three outcomes for plastic waste in Australia currently at the moment. In Victoria, there are a number of policies driving waste incineration into the state of Victoria. The Victorian Circular Economy, the Waste Reduction and Recycling Act is a prime document, and we have our organisation's been engaging with your state government and agencies for years now, trying to educate them about the threat of waste incineration, the manipulation of waste terminologies and definitions that drive and enable waste burning. And we're really disappointed to see that your government's not open to even acknowledging our submissions or any of the information that we give them. Sadly, Victoria now has a very unusual and, I would argue, nonsensical Circular Economy Act in many places where the definitions, waste management definitions, are conflated and confused all over the place. This delivered the Victorian Waste to Energy framework. These are the drivers of waste to energy incineration into Victoria. The head of Recycling Victoria has incredible powers to nominate any area in Victoria as a waste management precinct that can have an incinerator, and we know that there is even legislation enshrined in this Act, such as the Southeast Metropolitan Regional Act that enshrines waste contracts with waste to energy incineration through a regional council, and they've developed a business entity to do that. Effectively, what this does, though, is it excludes more sustainable, more zero waste type waste management industries. It actually kneecaps the recycling and the reuse and the composting and the more sustainable waste management industries by tilting Victoria's entire waste management policy towards waste incineration. That's a real shame for Victoria. And these acts and these policies are a really poor reflection of your government, and it's a real shame that they consider that waste to energy incineration is actually part of a circular economy. The rest of the world doesn't, but apparently the Victorian government, and more recently the Victorian Auditor General, believes that waste to energy incineration is a circular economy technology. It most definitely is not. So the Victorian government's quite out of step with the rest of the world on what constitutes a sustainable waste management technology. And as such, Victoria's not in a very good place. As you can see here, there are 7 major incinerators proposed for Melbourne and pretty much encircle the whole city. That's a real problem for air quality, for the environment, and for human health. So we know that the largest incinerator in the proposal in the pipeline, is the Maryvale incinerator, which is attached to the Opal pulp mill. We know that the Wallet and Sunbury incinerators are another massive, are the largest incinerator projects in Australia as well. We're very hopeful that the Lara incinerator has been put to bed for good, but we'll be watching that closely. They didn't get a CAP licence, but all these other ones did, and that's a real worry that the Victorian government have issued CAP licences for these projects before they've even submitted any environmental impact assessment documents or been reviewed, and even went so far as to increase the throughput of waste that can be burnt before the projects have submitted any documentation or even asked for it. So the Victorian government has made up their mind about who's going to burn waste and where in Victoria. We know that there is no social licence to operate incinerators in Victoria, and every community across Victoria for a number of years now has rejected incineration. The environment movement in Victoria is fairly united, and you can see this consensus statement here that includes the Boomerang Alliance, the Australian Conservation Foundation, and a whole range of other organisations that are calling out waste incineration for the climate and toxic pollution threat that they pose. So there's broad support in the environment movement. There's broad support amongst the frontline communities facing these projects to demand better, safer and more effective waste management in Victoria and move away from incineration. As I said, no social licence for this industry to operate in Australia anywhere. Every community that has faced an incinerator project has fought back. And that includes Western Australia. Sydney, as you can see here, ran one of the biggest, most successful campaigns. Queensland ran an excellent campaign and won that one in Ipswich. There have been numerous campaign wins in Victoria too. Craigieburn comes to mind. But there's also historical incinerator projects that we've defeated, particularly in Western Australia as well. And you can see here, this is a massive global protest during the COP in Paris, and you can see we're standing out the front of the big Paris incinerator there. It was a huge protest, and there's a global movement that underpins this Australian movement. So what is waste to energy incineration? The main technology that will be used in Victoria and around Australia will be a mass combustion technology. Mass combustion is basically a large bunker where all the residual waste is fed into. It's then mixed up a little bit to kind of homogenize it a bit, and it's picked up and it's fed through a hopper to what is likely to be a moving grate technology, where the waste rolls down a grate and is burnt as it rolls down this grate. What falls through the bottom of the grate becomes the bottom ash, and what's disintegrated and becomes ash and air emissions gets captured by the air pollution control system, which you can see here makes up more than 3/4 of the entire project. And that's an indication to you of just how serious the air pollution is from waste incinerators. They are the biggest part of the project is the air pollution control system, and it's the most expensive part. So because the incineration of waste, residual waste, comes with a highly complex mixture of toxic chemicals and emissions, all of those chemical substances have different types of air pollution control techniques. So this is what makes the air pollution control system so expensive. They have to have separate systems for nitrous oxides and acid gases. They have to have separate systems for particulates, separate systems for persistent organic pollutants, dioxins, furans, those kinds of things. So that's what makes them very, very expensive and dangerous technology. Sometimes waste to energy projects are originally promoted as gasification or pyrolysis. Certainly the Rockingham incinerator in Western Australia was pitched as a gasification incinerator. That was very promptly changed back to a mass combustion incinerator, and that's because gasification and pyrolysis technologies are completely unsuitable for such heterogeneous fuel sources such as mixed waste. These are systems that are designed for homogeneous fuel sources such as coal, oil and gas, which isn't great to burn, but it's a single homogeneous material. Waste represents every chemical combination in our entire materials production systems. So that's what makes it so so dangerous. But gasification is a combustion process. It just uses very small amounts of oxygen in the process, and it usually produces a syngas or perhaps a biochar. And then that can be converted into, apparently it can be converted into more chemicals that can be used to make more plastics. Unfortunately, it's not happening. The gasification technology has failed spectacularly around the world. In our 2013 report, Burning Waste for Energy, it doesn't stack up. It's on our website, provides some case studies from all over the world about gasification technology failures. It's come to Australia and failed spectacularly in Wollongong, the Swerve the Swerf campaign. But you can read about how it failed all throughout Europe, and particularly in Germany, and it continues to fail in the US. Pyrolysis is a similar process of heating the waste in the absence of oxygen. So gasification has very small controlled amounts of oxygen. Pyrolysis has zero oxygen involved. It produces a syngas and a type of char as well. These two, all of them actually, but gasification and pyrolysis particularly because of the high temperatures used and the volatility of the gases and the types of inputs, particularly if they're mixed waste inputs, are very prone to fires and explosions. So they're the three main types of incinerator technologies that are being proposed for Australia and particularly Victoria. Incinerators are well documented and well known to produce a whole range of air emissions. As I mentioned, nitrous oxides are proving to be one of the lead air pollutants that are a problem for the waste incineration industry. And you can read more about the impacts of nitrous oxides and the failure of regulation to effectively capture those in UK WIN, which is the United Kingdom Without Incineration Network. They're colleagues of ours in the UK that have done some incredible research and are demonstrating that the best practice incinerators that they have operating in the UK are not controlling their nitrous oxide emissions and all their climate emissions, all their toxic air pollutant emissions. So we know that acid gases, sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxides, those acid gases are a key incinerator air emission, as are carbon monoxide, particulates, and the full range of particulates, total suspended particulates, PM10, PM2.5, and micro and nanoparticles, for which there are no regulatory standards and no air pollution control equipment can capture those from an incinerator. We know that they emit volatile metals, mercury, cadmium, other acid gases like hydrogen chloride, hydrogen fluoride, volatile organic compounds, polyaromatic hydrocarbons and dioxins and furans. There's a whole range of documented air emissions from incinerators that are known to pollute the surrounding environment and pose public health threats. These are the main ones. We also know that nanoparticles particularly are emitted from incinerators, and this is a real problem because there's no air pollution control units to capture the nanoparticles, and yet they're so dangerous to human health. They go straight into the blood, the organs, the brain, and they can carry a whole range of toxic chemicals with them. They lodge in the body and they cause inflammation. And nanoparticles are one of those things where the amount of chemicals that a nanoparticle can contain relative to its volume ratio and size are quite extreme. So they become super toxic particles. You will probably hear that modern new incinerators are all wonderful, and it's just the old ones that are bad, and that there's nothing to worry about in terms of these new plants. They're all safe and non-polluting. Well, 3 international conventions say otherwise. The Stockholm Convention is concerned with persistent organic pollutants, things like dioxins, furans, and bromines. Persistent organic pollutants are the subject of this international convention because they are a global threat. They're transboundary, they're persistent, and they bioaccumulate in the global food chain. They ultimately end up in the polar ice caps, where they're re-released back into the marine environment as climate change melts those ice sheets, and those chemicals re-release into the oceans and pollute the marine food chain. The Stockholm Convention obliges countries who are signatory to that convention not to generate more persistent organic pollutants, and identifies waste incineration as a prime source of persistent organic pollution. The Minamata Convention, which is concerned with mercury, identifies waste incinerators as being in the top 5 industrial sources of mercury pollution globally. We know that we have a global mercury problem too. And we're obliged not to generate new sources of mercury pollution. And the Minamata Convention identifies waste incineration as a prime source. In fact, they're in the top 5. The Basel Convention is concerned with hazardous waste. The ash that incinerators generate is classified hazardous waste ash. In Western Australia, it's a class 5 hazardous waste, as it is in Europe. There's a lot of PR about how they're going to reuse the ash, and it's just claims of being part of the circular economy. This is just deliberate and willful misinformation. The ash cannot be reused, and the Basel Convention has strong recommendations around that countries who are a participant to the Basel Convention, like Australia, is obliged to uphold. So merely mixing this ash in some cement and then using that for construction is not supported under the Basel Convention. So there are strict recommendations around the management, treatment and disposal of the hazardous waste that incinerators generate, and the Basel Convention identifies those and identifies incinerators as being one of the prime sources of hazardous waste generation. New evidence is coming forward about brominated dioxins being emitted from incinerators, not just into the air via their flue gas, but also into the ash. Now, brominated dioxins haven't been really considered by the waste incineration industry. They don't have air pollution control filters to capture the pollution, brominated dioxin pollution, and there are no international standards set to limit the emissions of brominated dioxins. So this is a major data gap in regulation of this industry, but it can't be ignored because brominated dioxins are coming into the waste stream via increasing volumes of e-waste. And we know that e-waste is also ending up in the residual waste stream. In fact, it will be coming through the commercial and industrial waste streams as the amount of electronic waste in our world increases as well. So this is a key issue for any community facing an incinerator threat. You need to be asking your regulators how they're going to manage brominated dioxins and how they're going to control the emissions and set public health protection standards. We know that the ash is full of hazardous and toxic materials. And that's because when you consider that what the air pollution control filters capture is the ash, it's everything that the plant is trying not to let escape to the environment. So it's the worst of the worst. So the ash from incineration is full of highly hazardous and toxic materials, and we know that currently its mismanagement around in Europe has caused widespread contamination including the food chain. You can read about the impacts of toxic incinerator ash in these reports that we were involved with our colleagues at the International Pollutants Elimination Network, which is an international organisation that has been investigating and monitoring the impacts of hazardous waste incinerator ash around the world. So we know that incinerators emit PFAS to the air and also into the ash. They are not captured in the air pollution control filters, and they're not being safely managed in the ash. So PFAS is a huge problem associated with waste incinerators, and we should be concerned about that because Australia already has a massive PFAS contamination problem. We shouldn't be adding to it through the management of our waste. Microplastics, as I mentioned earlier, here's another study demonstrating that incinerators emit microplastics to the air. These travel long distances. They get into the environment. They get into the food chain. They're a major source of toxic and hazardous waste pollution. These issues of microplastics, PFAS in the ash and the emissions have not been addressed by waste incinerator proponents in Australia. Biomonitoring studies. This is really important as our colleagues at Toxico Watch and Zero Waste Europe have been documenting the real life impacts of best practice EU incinerators in Europe, and what they're finding doesn't match the claims of the regulators or the industry, and that is widespread contamination around incinerator plants. They're finding dioxin, PFAS, a whole range of toxic pollutants that are linked to these incinerators. It can't be argued that they're old technologies because they're not. They're the latest EU best practice technology incinerators and have even claimed to go beyond EU best practice standards. The Harlingen incinerator was shut down, and there's an immediate moratorium following the discovery of widespread contamination around the Harlingen incinerator. You can read about the biomonitoring and of the persistent organic pollutants that they found, and Zero Waste Europe have done a whole series on this because there are a whole range of other incinerators in Europe that have found the same. One of the reasons they're finding this pollution in the surrounding environment of best practice EU incinerators is through what's well, firstly, it's the way that they're monitoring dioxin emissions. Best practice EU standards for dioxin emissions monitoring is really only two samples a year. And as you can see here in this first picture, the results were extremely low for the dioxin that they found. They only measured it twice, and they used a short-term sampler. When they switched to a long-term sampler under the MESA system, they found much, much higher levels of dioxin were being emitted. And contributing to this was the issue of OTNOC, which is other than normal operating conditions. These are the times where the air pollution control filter is being serviced and cleaned. These are times when the incinerator is being started up or shutting down. These moments are when the air emissions from incinerators are allowed to be released to the environment without filter. Now, one OTNOC event can emit a year's worth of pollution limits for one incinerator. So OTNOC events are not adequately regulated and are contributing to the widespread pollution around incinerators, but the failure to use long-term MESA systems, long-term sampling MESA systems is showing that they're vastly under-reporting and under-measuring the dioxin emissions and the impacts on the surrounding environment. So we need to demand proper full MESA systems monitoring that includes OTNOC events, and we really need to start talking about continuous emissions monitoring for dioxins, not just in the commissioning phase but throughout the whole life of the project. As I mentioned, Zero Waste Europe have done a fantastic series called The True Toxic Toll of the biomonitoring that they found around incinerators in a range of countries in Europe, Spain, the Netherlands, France. And what they found was a pattern of underreported emissions and underreported contamination, and it's a very useful and worthwhile series of reports. You can find them on our website. I urge you to read these and share these with your local government and state regulators. In Paris, more recently, I just want to highlight the Paris situations because it's so dire. So the Paris incinerator is best practice waste incineration technology. It's operating to the latest EU best practice standards. And they started to look at the impacts of this incinerator in Paris and found that the dioxin contamination around the plant was widespread, and it had impacted not just the soil but vegetation, eggs, meat, dairy. This Toxico Watch investigation with Zero Waste Europe caused the French health authorities to go and investigate themselves, and they concluded the same results. So the French health authorities went back to 12 million people in Paris and have prohibited them from eating their backyard eggs and produce because of the dioxin contamination around that plant. They also have just more recently picked up PFAS in the air filters of the neighbouring schools. That's a significant concern because that means that it's in the air that the children are breathing. So there's that case study and this report from France, which is very compelling, because in Australia, the argument from your state governments and your regulators in the industry is that waste incineration is safe because we're operating to an EU best practice standard. Right here in front of you is the evidence to demonstrate that that is untrue. Best practice EU incinerators are causing widespread dioxin contamination. You will have heard that the old incinerators are bad and the new ones are good. Well, I just demonstrated to you how the new incinerators are not meeting those claims. And Lausanne in Switzerland is a really good example of how old incinerators also left a legacy of contamination. It's the same situation here. Children are not allowed to play in the soil in their backyards in this whole area now because of the legacy dioxin pollution from the Lausanne incinerator. And Europe relied heavily on incineration for heating. It's part of their district heating model, but it came with a very high price that Lausanne will pay forever now. These are forever chemicals. They don't go away. They are only going to accumulate higher and higher and higher over the years. And here we have what is effectively a dead zone where children can't even play in their own backyard's soil. Why should we be worried about that and toxic and hazardous chemicals? If our Australian authorities had set our environmental health protection standards to protect children's health, we would have the best protection. And that's really a message that we are really strong on. Children's environmental health protection should be our priority, because children are not just little adults where you can just shrink the volume of dose. It's not a dose-response relationship for children. They're developing. Exposure to toxic chemicals can interrupt fundamental windows of development and cause lifelong impacts. This is because their bodies are still developing. They don't have toxic elimination processes. Every generation, the body burden of toxins is growing for children. So our children have 250 chemicals in their body at birth that they didn't have 50 years ago. So making children's health protection is a major priority and should be the underpinning argument against waste incineration, because our children are increasingly exposed to more and more chemical pollution. These are having intergenerational impacts, and waste incineration is a key threat. If we set our environmental and health protection standards to protect children, we would be protecting the environment and future generations. So really, children's environmental health protection really should be the policy driver here. Public health in general, in relation to waste incineration, has been investigated and studied. There are many, many reports around the world. The value of the Australian Public Health, the Public Health Association of Australia's systematic review is that it's a systematic review. It didn't. It's not one study. It's looked at all of the available evidence, and it's a very conservative study. It only looked at English-speaking studies. My colleagues in Europe would argue that it's underestimated the impact and hasn't gone far enough. But for our purposes in Australia, the fact that we have a systematic review that, okay, it looked only at English reports and studies, still confirmed a relationship between incinerator emissions and human health impacts, and concluded that really no incinerator can be regarded as safe. More recently, the Public Health Association of Australia partnered with the Australian National University and looked at the economic, environmental and socio-political aspects of the waste incineration industry and concluded that they just weren't justifiable. So these two studies are really important for Australian campaigners. They can't be ignored anymore. These are systematic reviews. They cannot accuse anyone of cherry picking, and yet the industry and the regulators appear to be ignoring these studies. So we need to put them at the forefront all the time, because public health should be the priority and children's health needs to be right at the top there. The Public Health Association systematic review concluded that no incinerators should be located near food production areas, and that food grown near an incinerator should be avoided. And this is very much around the evidence of food contamination that I spoke of previously with Toxico Watch and Zero Waste Europe. Yet, scandalously, in New South Wales, they're all being cited in agricultural regions and parts of Victoria too. The conclusions were that the present study provides economic, environmental and socio-political recommendations against waste to energy incineration. The transition to a circular economy, and we know we're moving to renewable energy, combined with the violations of social justice, renders future waste to energy projects unjustifiable. So that's a very strong and powerful statement from that second Public Health Association review. I highly recommend that you use that. The state regulators are ignoring this, and I don't think we should let them. We need to hold our state regulators and our state governments to account and uphold these two important studies in Australia. Safe, you'll hear all the time that waste to energy incinerators are safe. They can't use that term enough. You read all about it in ABC articles and news media and everywhere. But the Public Health Association warned that no incinerator could be considered safe. But you'll hear the waste management lobby again promote the narrative of the industry that it's a proven and safe technology. You'll hear the Vic government talking about how they're completely safe, and you'll hear the industry themselves, such as Cleanaway, talk about how they're safe and reliable. The people who don't have a vested interest suggest otherwise, and we should acknowledge that. So I think it's really wanting to highlight the narratives and the propaganda that are being promoted heavily by the government, by the industry, and they're getting a hold in media, which is a real crime. But you can see the power of the lobby here. The Waste Management and Resource Recovery Association is the industry's national peak lobby group. When you look at their boards and directors, you will see the waste incineration industry dominates throughout. So we have a waste management sector that is dominated by the waste incineration industry, which is effectively the waste disposal sector has really captured our systems and our states, sadly. So just really trying to alert frontline communities to the propaganda and ways to challenge that. And these two Public Health Association reports are very effective in doing that. We know, as I mentioned earlier, that waste incinerators are prone to fire and explosions. And there's a fantastic organisation in Europe called Arnica that have mapped all the fire and explosions of incinerators in Europe. And it's a fantastic resource. And I'm highlighting this because these are they're not everyday threats, but they can be catastrophic threats. You burn down an incinerator and you release all that pollution, you can't get it back. This puts the lives of firefighters and frontline communities at risk, and we really need to consider the explosive and fire threat that incinerators inherently have, while we're seeing batteries and other waste fires all over the country, as we see electronic waste flood into our waste stream. Batteries, small batteries that people don't even know are in products that they're throwing out. You'll also hear that the EU loves incinerators, and that's why they use them heavily throughout Europe. And we're just following Europe's lead, and we just need to catch up with Europe. Well, in 2017, the European Commission wrote to all of their member states to recommend against waste incineration. It is not the policy of the European Commission to promote incinerators, as states, regulators and industry will have you believe. That is another deliberate and willful misinformation. So here's the policy document that proves it, and they recommend that member states decommission old incinerators and not build new ones, and instead set up a moratorium. They want member states to invest in sustainable zero waste systems instead of waste incineration. They've gone so far as to exclude waste incineration from their Sustainable Finance Taxonomy report. The European Commission now classifies waste incineration in the same category as coal and nuclear. They've removed all subsidies because they recognise that waste to energy incineration is not a renewable energy. We know that it's the most expensive and the most polluting, climate polluting way to make energy or manage waste, and there's some good references here for you. We also know that waste incineration is more than 1.5 times more climate polluting than coal, and when it comes to gas, it's twice as polluting as gas. So it's not a renewable energy, and there are numerous resources available to prove that. As I mentioned earlier, our 2013 report and the associated fact sheet is just as relevant today as it ever was. There are some good case studies in this report on the failure of the gasification technologies, and you'll see on the front page here, that's a failed gasification plant in Germany. You can read about that plant and the case study in this report. You'll also hear that we have to move to waste to energy incineration because we're running out of landfills, and it's better than landfill, right? No, it's not. And you'd think that the Victorian government and the Australian government would have commissioned an in-depth, robust investigation into what would be the best residual waste options for Australia, and no one did. So we went away and did that. We engaged Pneumonia, independent consultancy, to look at Australia's situation. They looked at our waste management policies, our waste flows. They did a thorough investigation and concluded that waste to energy incineration was the worst outcome for Australia's residual waste management in terms of air pollution costs, climate pollution costs, and costs to public health. What was the best outcome for Australia's residual waste management was landfill with full pre-treatment. And full pre-treatment means removing all of the organic and methane potential from the waste stream before it goes into landfill. And you can either do that through advanced waste sorting or through a mechanical recovery biological treatment. There are other technologies coming to the fore, like I love the soldier fly larvae and the incredible success they're having in managing organic waste. So these are the things that make a more sustainable residual waste model. That is to really look at residual waste and look at treating residual waste to make it safe and benign, so that it doesn't emit methane, it doesn't release toxic chemicals, it becomes a much, much smaller inert material that then can be safely landfilled or containerised. This report here you can find on our website, and a webinar with the experts explaining this report. I highly recommend you look that up. It's on our Zero Waste Australia website. More recently, I was fortunate to contribute to an international report with colleagues from the International Pollutants Elimination Network all over the world, where we concluded that waste incineration is actually driving the triple planetary crisis. That's climate change, biodiversity loss, and novel entities, which are chemical pollutants which we are unable to regulate and measure or know anything about. So this is a very thorough report. I highly recommend sharing this and promoting this report. It's completely robust. You can find it on ResearchGate. You can find it on our website, and there are webinars attached to this report launch that we held in Australia, which I highly recommend people view as well. But this is a very solid report to back up any of your campaign arguments. There are case studies, and it provides the latest evidence on this technology to date. We know that Zero Waste Europe are providing incredible and increasing number of zero waste city model case studies, and here are just 8 of them. Zero waste models are working around Europe, and this is the good news story, and these are the positive examples you can share to demonstrate that we don't need waste incinerators, that Europe, that has a very similar waste stream to Australia, is able to manage their residual waste without resorting to incineration. And we know that the global experts on the circular economy don't regard waste to energy incineration as part of a circular economy. And this is really important. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation is highly regarded as a world-leading expert on circular economy systems, and yet the Victorian government is at odds with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, enshrining and redefining waste to energy incineration as part of a circular economy. And that's just deliberately untrue and misleading, and they really should be held accountable for that deliberate and willful misclassification of a technology and its impacts on the circular economy. In fact, waste incineration is a key threat to the circular economy because it steals finite resources, it undermines the recycling industries that the circular economy need. Circular economy needs a zero waste model to provide the backbone of a circular economy. That's where the clean resources come from. When you tilt your waste management policy framework towards incineration, you cut out all of those opportunities and you kneecap the potential of a circular economy. And that's a real shame in Victoria, where your act that addresses waste management is the Circular Economy Act. So alternatives for residual waste management include mechanical recovery biological treatment, which is being used successfully in the US and the EU. Paul Connett, who we've brought to Australia numerous times, unfortunately we didn't get to the East Coast because of the pandemic, and he's retired now, but I highly recommend his book, and you can watch his videos too and his presentations. He's a world-leading expert on zero waste solutions, but there are a whole load of other experts around the world. Dr. Jeffrey Morris, has extensively analysed the climate and pollution and health and sustainability costs and claims between landfill and incinerator, and confirmed that landfill is definitely better. Dr. Enzo Faviano is the Chief Scientific Officer of Zero Waste Europe and is an absolute expert on zero waste city models. Eric Lombardi and Kate Bailey have, from the US, have been leading sustainable waste management in the US for decades, and this book on MRBT is really incredibly useful to our campaign. We know, though, that Australia has not just a municipal waste problem, it has an industrial waste problem, it has a very significant hazardous waste problem, and we're urging the Australian government to consider and address waste holistically. And one of the ways they can do this is through a range of emerging non-combustion technologies that can not only manage residual waste, but they can manage a lot of hazardous wastes as well. And this is the kind of technology that Australia should be investing in, not waste incinerators. We shouldn't be hiding hazardous waste in cement kilns or incinerators. It generates very dangerous pollution. Non-combustion technologies are really exciting emerging technologies. They've been proven to work in other countries. We even had a gas phase chemical reduction technology here in Western Australia. It safely processed all of our PCB stockpiles. Sadly, our government didn't invite them to stay, and they left. And now we have 2 incinerators instead. So gas phase chemical reduction is a non-combustion technology that could manage residual waste. It doesn't emit toxic air pollution or generate toxic ash, and you can even generate hydrogen from the process, which could then be used for energy. Supercritical water oxidization is another one, and these non-combustion technologies are summarised in a report by the International Pollutants Elimination Network and the Swedish government. I highly recommend this one as well as an alternative to incinerators. This is the kind of technology we should be investing in, not historical dinosaur technologies like incinerators. So our recommendations to the government are to place an immediate moratorium on all waste to energy incinerator projects. We need to amend the Renewable Energy Act to stop awarding subsidies for waste incineration that has a tiny fraction of biomass in there. That's a complete subversion of the Renewable Energy Act to rely on a tiny bit of biomass waste when really the industry relies on plastic for its calorific value, and that's a fossil fuel. So waste incinerators are fossil fuel industries parading as renewable energy, and the Renewable Energy Act needs to be amended to lock out waste to energy incineration. We're waiting for Chris Bowen to do that. We're grateful that he closed the door on giving renewable energy subsidies to this industry, but we need to close the door once and for all and prevent all the other downfalls that biomass incineration brings. We want the government to invest in non-combustion residual waste disposal technologies. We shouldn't be harming human health or the environment to manage our residual waste, and it's clear that industry are not going to be asked to improve their hazardous waste management or their industrial waste outputs. So this is the kind of technology that the government needs to invest in. We'd like to see the government invest in advanced waste collection, source separation, because that is the key to a sustainable zero waste model, is how we collect and separate our waste. That defines what happens to that waste after that. So a zero waste model prioritises better collection and source separation methods. We need better and more effective material recovery facilities, and we need to move to advanced waste systems. We need to increase collection and composting of all organic waste. There are many communities in Australia that don't have waste collection services at all. So we've got a long way to go to provide a sustainable waste management model. Instead of investing in the most expensive and polluting technologies, we could be providing collection systems for communities that don't even have them. We need to get organic waste completely out of our waste stream. It needs to be composted and put back into our biosphere, not burnt and put into our atmosphere where it's driving climate change. So we can invest in those anaerobic digestion and all the other safer residual waste management technologies. We know that waste to energy incineration is part of the fossil fuel industry, and that was highlighted by the UN Special Rapporteur that came to Australia in 2022 and met with a number of frontline communities and declared that waste incineration is the end of the line for fossil fuels, and he urged our government to not invest in them, but they haven't listened so far. We know that the industry is just telling the public that there aren't any problematic air emissions or any impacts on their soil. I hope this presentation has helped you see very clearly the PR that the industry is promoting and how untruthful it is, and the wealth of evidence that exists to demonstrate that what Mr. Kirkman is saying here is untrue, and he needs to be held accountable to that. So thank you very much for listening to me. You can find many of our reports on our websites, Toxics Free Australia and Zero Waste Australia. I urge you to go and check out our reports, and please do get in touch if you'd like to ask any questions or need any more assistance. Keep going, Victoria. You're doing a fantastic job, and Sunbury, you're in a good position. You've got a wealth of campaigns in Australia behind you. You've got time to stop this incinerator, and we're going to be right there helping you do it. So thank you for listening today, and I hope this presentation is helpful to you all. Thank you.